समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया?
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
In this episode of Cut the Clutter, we'll talk about two things, or let me say one and a half things. So one, where we will talk in some detail, is about some takeaways from the defense budget this year, because this year's defense budget has seen a significant increase overall. Even more so, it has seen a sizable increase in capital outlay. Capital outlay means the money that's available to the armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force to buy new weapons, new technologies, new systems, plus also beef up or add to the numbers of systems already existing. If you have one kind of aircraft, missile, one kind of tank you already have, you can buy more, or you can buy another kind. All of that comes from capital budget. Capital budget has gone up significantly, and we noticed a couple of things there that I'm going to talk about over the next few minutes. And after that, I will also touch upon the controversy that rocked Parliament today, that is related to former Army Chief General Naravane, who also used to be a columnist at The Print. I will touch upon some aspects. That is the reason I'm calling that the half part of this episode. That's the reason I'm calling it 1.5. So let me come to what is one right now. If you see the defense allocation for capital outlay this year, that has gone up this year from about 1,80,000 crores. In fact, what was 1,80,000 crores last year became 1,86,000 crores, because after a long time, a trend was broken. I know it's a little digression, but it's an important point to make. It's an important footnote to start this with. Consecutively for more than 10 years, and I will probably dedicate a full episode of what is something that I call a national tragedy, that year after year, armed forces have not been able to spend the money allocated to them under the capital budget. Everything allocated under the revenue budget, because that is daily running expense, salaries, pensions. Those are not elastic. Those are fixed costs. Those will be spent. But the money that was made available to armed forces to spend to buy new equipment, etc., every year they've been returning that. This year, the continuing financial year, which will end on 31st March this year, has been the first in maybe 11 or 12 when armed forces would not only have spent all that was allocated to them, that is 1,80,000, but also that revised estimate is larger, 1,86,000. So the armed forces will spend more. In the past 11 years, the revised estimate, believe it or not, was always lower than the budget estimate for capital outlay. That has changed this year. That is the Sindoor effect. Because of that, capital budget has also been increased this year quite substantively, from 1,86,000 to 2,19,000. That's an increase of 33,000 crore. However, there lies a little twist there. And the twist is, if you have this much available for defense budget, if this is your defense spending, how much of it goes into salaries, pensions, fuel, rent, deployments, etc., ammunition for practice, training? All of that is revenue expense, salary expense, pension expense. How much remains for capital acquisitions? That is the issue. So if this much is the total budget, this much goes to salaries, this much goes to pensions. See the distance I travel. I'm saying this is salary, this is pension. So pensions are more than salaries, right? And then what you're left with is capital outlay. We have to look at the percentage of the budget that is left for capital acquisitions. And there we've noticed a dramatic fact. And that dramatic fact is that while the Modi government has said that it has a muscular policy on national defense, the fact is that since the Modi government came in, the share, the percentage of capital outlay as to the total defense budget has actually fallen. It fell drastically, has remained low. Even now, with the increase in the capital outlay, it's improved only a little bit more. It hasn't reached the same levels that, say, the UPA's 10 years had. And this is despite the fact that all of us, me included, wrote really rude articles about A.K. Antony, do nothing Antony, that he was doing nothing. In one of my articles, I also said that A.K. Antony as defense minister is like the Bapu Nadkarni of Indian politics. Bapu Nadkarni was that Indian all-rounder of the 60s. This is actually cricket aside, and I know everybody follows cricket, but this is from a different era of cricket. On January 12, 1964, Bapu Nadkarni, left-arm spin, he bowled a remarkable spell of 32 overs, 27 maidens, 21 of which were consecutive maidens. That's a world record, 5 runs, and of course, 0 wickets. So he didn't let you score any runs, but he did not get you out either. That's the comparison I used for A.K. Antony. That A.K. Antony is a do-nothing Antony. He doesn't want to buy anything, and that's why the armed forces are suffering. However, when I look at the data, it's telling me a different story now. And that is something I noticed, and I thought I will bring it to you. If you see capital outlay as a percentage of the total budget, now to depoliticize it or to go across political eras, we are starting with 99-2000. 99-2000 is a very important year because that is when, one, the Vajpayee government is in power, and that's also when the Kargil war takes place. Then India's defense budget in that year is 53,395 crores. I am not giving you updated rupee or rupee updated as to the value today every time, but at some stops I will explain to you for better understanding. 53,395 crore rupees in 99-2000 would have been about 2.4 lakh crores today. So if you look at the budget today, in today's value, it's almost 4 times, at least 3.5 times of what it was in 99-2000. Then every year it goes up. You can see this graphic. This tells you every year how the defense budget is going up. As the budget goes up, you can see where it has had the bigger jumps, and that is shown in percentages. So the first big jump that you see is in 2000-2001. Why? Because that is when the war in Kargil is taken place. That is when General V.P. Malik said, in exasperation, we'll fight with whatever we have, because the armed forces were feeling run down. And that's when the first increase came in. That's an increase of 32.87%. That will show, this is the total budget. That will show on your graphic. And then you see every year, the next 3 years of Vajpayee government, the increase has been very marginal. This is in spite of the fact that Op Parakram is on. Increase has been very marginal. That also confirms my impression that I've always had, and I've written about it, that Vajpayee government had never intended to go to war in Op Parakram. This was truly a case of coercive diplomacy, except that as they said to me at that point, and which was reported, that the threat of war had to be so serious that even we would start believing it. Then comes UPA, and lo and behold, suddenly 2004-05, a nearly 16% increase in defense budget takes place, and then it continues like that. 8% next year, 8% the year after, 8% again next 3 years, average 8% per year, then 9.6, and then we come to 2009-10. This goes up to 35%, 34.9% in 1 year. Why did that happen? Because the previous year, the 26/11 attacks had taken place. UPA had come back with a larger majority. There were also some new purchases made for which payments had to be made. Some capital assets have been purchased or ordered, so advances were paid. This goes up by 34.91, let's say 35%, and then carries on like that once again at a high average, 5.47% the next year, then 15.25%, then 17.59%. This year's overall increase in that ballpark. And we see this as a remarkable increase. And then 2013-14, 6.5%. And then we come to the Modi era. Now, this is a very important graphic because this is telling you, this is not giving you absolute numbers. This is telling you the percentage by which the budget increases every year. So 1 year it is 32%, the other year it's 15%, the other year it's 6%, then it goes up to 34% like that. So this is a very important graphic. This also tells you that spending on defense in India had not necessarily been determined by the ideology of the government ruling the country. I would say that these are wise people. They have decided to spend as per the requirements of the day, national requirements of the day, as they saw them at that point of time. So maybe a little bit of apology is due to A.K. Antony as well. Then we come in the Modi era. In the Modi era, the increase is not that steep. In the Modi era, the increase is not that steep. 2014-15, 2018-19, and 2023-24 are the only 3 years until now when defense had an increase in double figures. That is also in low double figures, 10%, 12%, 13% like that. It's only now that the increase is 15.19%. So once again, it's not as if Modi government has been suddenly opening the taps and spending more money on defense. In fact, I would also confess that I got it wrong in one of my national interest columns when I noticed the first couple of years Modi government not increasing the defense budget substantially. Then I thought that maybe the government is indicating that they believe they will not be a major threat to India, military threat to India. And I in fact said this is something worth appreciating, that contrary to the impression that we might have had, Narendra Modi is not about to convert India into a national security state. Because the definition of a national security state is where the security system, the armed forces, have the first right on the nation's resources. Pakistan is your classical national security state, because everything else in Pakistan, the entire society, is subservient and secondary to the security system or the armed forces. India was not going in that direction, and we said this is a good thing. I will share a link to that column with you. Now when I reflect on it, I figure that I had also made a judgment error there. India should have been spending more on defense all of these years. However, this done, you've seen how these percentages move, and it's very welcome that this year this percentage has moved up. Also that this year the percentage of capital outlay has also gone up. So this year, for example, 27.95% of the entire budget, that's a little less than 1/3, is available for capital outlays. That means Army, Navy, Air Force can all look at their acquisitions. Everything will not be bought this year. Some things will need getting advances paid for. Rafales, if India signs up, an advance will have to be paid, maybe 10% of the value or 5% of the value. P-75 submarines, if India orders, an advance will have to be paid of some percentage. So it's not as if Army, Navy, Air Force will say, okay, gee, Daddy has given us money, so let's go to Hamleys and buy whatever toys I want. It doesn't happen like that. In fact, India's defense acquisition procedure, DAP 2025, is not out yet, and we are well into 2026. So buying for defense is complicated. However, at least this much money is now available. That is 27.95%. In fact, if we look at India's defense budgeting now, for the past 7 years, the capital outlay has been in the same ballpark as a percentage of the defense budget. So this is the next graphic. Please see, this shows you the movement of the capital outlay as a percentage of the total defense budget. And again, this is counterintuitive, because if you go back in time, you can see that in 99-2000, the Kargil year, it's only 22.9%. It's very low. Next year, it picks up 25.27, then 27.29, stays in that ballpark for the next 3 years for the remaining period of the Vajpayee government. And the first UPA year, remarkable. It comes up to 37.56%. I have looked at this data. My colleague Keshav Padmanabhan has done the calculations and has pulled it out. Snehesh Alex Phillips has validated it. Nevertheless, this is data from government's own budget papers. 37.56. And I thought that would be the highest in the past 26 years, but that's not true. Wait, please stay with me. Next year, it is 35.65, very healthy. Next year, 35.97. call it 36, very healthy. 37.2, it goes up again, and then 38.86% in 2008-9. 38.86%. That means 38 rupees out of the 100 allocated to defense were actually spent on capital acquisitions. That's remarkable. That's the highest percentage in the last 27 years. I am adding 26, 27, the highest percentage. If India were to get there now, then this overall budget will have to increase a great deal. And it's not as if it was a one-year bump. I told you the previous 4 years had averaged 37. Now it's 38.86. You can call it 39. Next year is 32.9. Call it 33. 34.4. 34.16. 33.41. See how high these percentages are on this graphic. 2014-15, the NDA government comes in, it drops a little bit to 33.17, little bit, about 4%, 4 percentage points drop, but not that significant. But the trend is set. Next year it falls to 30.5%, and next year it falls off the cliff. It comes to 23.05%, then 24%, 23%, 23.99, you can call it 24, again 23.99, you can call it 24, then 24.13, 28.24, 29, then it has started going up a little, yet the highest it has reached so far in the Modi era is 29%, 29.01, so I'll call it 29%, but I'm also giving you the precise figure, if you like decimals, 29.01% in 2022-23. It has never crossed the 30% barrier. In 10 years, for the first time under Modi government. Now, why did that happen? Two things we have to understand. First of all, you know that I'm giving you this data and there are absolute numbers. And you will see, oh, the value of this much was something else, then it's something else now. So what I've done is, at various points, at various stops, when we cross the next lakh crore or the next trillion rupees in our defense budget, I've given you the approximate value. I'm starting with 2000, the value of 53,395 crores, which was the defense budget in 2000. That would today be about 2.4 lakh crores. This is all very approximate. Then see, when we cross the first trillion rupee barrier, the first time the trillion rupee barrier in defense budget was crossed was in 2006-7. These are absolute numbers as of then. 1 lakh crore or 1,04,000 crores, which was the defense budget in 2006-7, that would today be 3 lakh crores. Then we crossed the 2 lakh crore barrier or 2 trillion rupee barrier in 2011-12. That was 2,02,572 crores. That would today be approximately 5 lakh crores. I'm giving you this comparison so you can put today's budget of 7,84,678 crores in perspective. It's not as if we've gone up 14 times or 14 and a half times from 99 2000. It's also that the value of the rupee is changing meanwhile. The 3 trillion rupee or 3 lakh crore barrier is broken in 2015-16, which is worth about 5,25,000 crore today. Again, for perspective, 4 lakh crores or 4 trillion we cross in 2018-19. That is worth about 5.6, 5.7 lakh crores today. Then we cross the 5 lakh crore barrier, 5 trillion rupee barrier in 2022-23. The budget is 5,25,166 crores. That's worth about 6 lakh crores today. And then the budget of 24-25, which is 6,21,940 crores. That would be about 6.6 lakh crores today. That's because inflation has been a little bit low the last couple of years. That gives you a more realistic idea of how our defense spending is going up. Zeros come in, but zeros don't exactly add up to what they look like because the value of the currency keeps changing with time. That's why one good way of understanding your defense spending is to assess it as a percentage of your GDP. Under the Modi government so far, it's been maintained almost consistent at around 1.9% of GDP. This year, it has come to 2% of GDP. I commend to you to take a fresh look at the chart of the increase, the trend in defense budget increase. Defense budgets are not cut. No budgets are cut in the government. Budgets usually go up. Defense budgets have gone up every year. But if you see it, see how it's been going up under various governments. Under UPA, the first year 15.86%, then 8%, 8% that I told you. Then 9-10, you can understand, about 35%. That is just after 26-11. But it continues like that. Even in 2 of the 4 years after that, it is still well into double figures. That is high double figures, 15% or above. It falls then as the Modi government takes over. As the Modi government takes over, it goes to 12.57, then 8.7, 9.95, you can call it 10, 5.55, 12.37. See this chart. This tells you that generally defense budget increases under Modi government have been quite moderate and quite low. Probably the calculation was that a real military threat is not going to come. That calculation has now changed quite dramatically. First, with the Chinese coming and sitting on dharna in East Ladakh in the summer of 2020, and now after Operation Sindoor. The question that will arise, and I know you are smart, so you will ask me. The question that will arise is that under Modi government also, UP government also, defense budget has been rising so much. Why has the capital outlay as a share of defense budget struggled? So if you see this graphic, this tells you how defense budgeting changed dramatically as the Modi government came in. Modi government made the promise of one rank, one pension. Now we have a little bit of a handicap in analyzing that because until 2016-17, defense pensions were listed under the head defense pensions / miscellaneous. That also included the salaries and expenses of civilian staff working with defense forces. That was just about 8 to 9% of that overall number. You can make an estimate of what the pension expense was until then. In 2016-17, the Modi government actually carried out a reform in the statement of the budget. When they started listing the pensions expenses separately from miscellaneous, which is defense civil. So you get a more granular number. However, including the civil expenses in 2014-15 under pensions and miscellaneous, you had 56,202 crores. Next year was 63,335 crores. And then it suddenly shoots up. It nearly doubles to 1,18,465 crores. Why? Because that is when Modi government has implemented the one rank, one pension scheme. This was notified on 7th of November 2015. Only 1 quarter's amount was paid for that financial year. However, next year came in the full implication of all 4 quarters, and also arrears began to be paid. Since then, pensions became a much larger element in India's defense budget, to the extent that it became the largest head, larger than salaries and almost as much as the capital outlay. In fact, last year, the capital spending was 1,86,000 crores. Pension bill was 1,60,000 crores. This year, the estimated pension bill is 1,71,338 crores. It was this rising pension bill that persuaded the Modi government to bring in the Agniveer scheme. However, it will take quite some time, almost a decade, before the Agniveer scheme begins to show its impact in the overall pension bill. This is, therefore, it's the same pie. It's the same pie that's increasing a little bit. However, the expense on pensions suddenly increased this much, so pensions took a much larger chunk of that pie. That's why less has been available for capital spending, and that is where most of the increase has now taken place, because salaries, pensions, they will sort of serendipitously normally carry on the way they are carrying on until the next pay commission comes in. And now finally the current ongoing controversy. Now it is true that General Naravane wrote this book, Four Stars of Destiny, which was stopped by government from publication when it was ready to go to the press. Maybe it had already printed and copies were available, because excerpts from the book were released to PTI. PTI released those extracts written by its reporter Manas Bhuyan on 18th of December 2023. That is more than 2 years ago. These were published in all publications. A PTI story like this will be published by everybody, including us. You can see our story there. The headline is, I was handed a hot potato with carte blanche. In Hindi, I will say, मुझे बहुत बड़ी चुनौती सौंप दी गई थी, लेकिन खुली छुट्टी भी दी गई कि आप जो चाहे कर ले. Says Naravane on Rajnath's message during Eastern Ladakh tensions. So this is a published story written by PTI, released by PTI to everybody on 18 December 2023. However, much before that and much before the book, on 31st of August 2020, Snehesh Alex Philip wrote a story which was published on 31st of August 2020 at 11:40 a.m. This is when this tank standoff that we are talking about at the R2 range, which is the two passes, Rechinla and Rezangla. Rezangla is a famous pass featured in the movie 120 Bahadur. Indian Army climbed up on these passes. This was the Kailash range operation. This was called Operation Snow Leopard. In fact, I had also done an episode of Cut the Clutter then, of which I will reshare a copy with you tomorrow or maybe later in the day. This story was headlined, Fresh Clash in Ladakh, Indian Army thwarts China's move to change status quo at Pangong Tso. This is the south bank of Pangong Tso. Kailash range overlooks the south bank of Pangong Tso. Indian tanks had climbed up there. Chinese came in from the other side, sort of barrel to barrel, and that is where this was diffused, because the Chinese knew that tactically India had played a tactical masterstroke. I'm not calling it a strategic masterstroke. I'm not calling it a historic move. I'm not calling it a victory, but this was a tactical masterstroke, because India had gone and occupied really important heights from where they could look down on Chinese garrisons, and Chinese did not want that. And that is when the Chinese came to the negotiating table. And yes, in a negotiation, both sides give up something. India relented to China on the Kailash range. So the Chinese agreed to the Indian solution in the Fingers area on the north bank of Pangong Tso, the lake, and India then de-escalated on the Kailash range. That was the quid pro quo. In fact, this deployment, this Operation Snow Leopard, was also called a QPQ, quid pro quo operation. There is therefore no real mystery about this. 31st August 2020 at 8:06 p.m., Snehesh's second story was published, which was headlined, In Race to Passes, Indian Army Captures Heights Near South Bank of Pangong Tso. This story looked into the account from an army statement from late evening the same day. In fact, it was in the process of climbing up. This move was led by specialized units, including those of Special Frontier Force. This is where Subedar Nima Tenzin stepped on an old obsolete mine. Those are the hazards of border areas, and died the only casualty in the operation. Now, for soldiers or recently retired soldiers to write about operations is always a tricky thing, always a controversial thing globally. In the American situation, since that's very recent, in 2012, a member of the SEAL Team 6, which had carried out the Osama bin Laden operation, Matt Bissonnette, wrote a memoir. He wrote it under a pseudonym, Mark Owen, but obviously the powers that be found out. He was then charged. This went to court. Ultimately, in the court, he agreed to turn over all his royalties, which the judge assessed to be $6.4 or $6.7 billion, plus a penalty, and also offered an apology for not giving this book first to the Pentagon for legal scrutiny and vetting. That is just to make the point that writing of memoirs by recently retired soldiers, particularly those in key positions or key operations, has always been a complicated issue.